Hello, my name is Julia McGarry, and in this presentation, I'm going to be covering fiscal policy. First, I'm going to go over the federal budget, then what fiscal policy is, if fiscal health is being overlooked, and Social Security and Medicare. The federal budget. In any given year, the United States collects trillions of dollars in tax revenue and spends trillions of dollars on goods and services, which is a topic I will expand on later. The federal budget is balanced when their tax revenue is equal to government expenditures in any fiscal year. For example, if the government collects $3 trillion in one fiscal year and spends $3 trillion in the same year, the budget is balanced. It is more likely that the balance is not equal. Most commonly, we are in a budget deficit, where spending exceeds revenue. The total years of budget deficit minus the total years of budget surplus is how we determine the national debt, which is in the top corner of this infographic and is $34 trillion. The national debt is important to understand as I will be discussing deficits and debt and their impact on the economy. This graph also shows that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, defense, and interest on national debt are the largest budget items, each of which I will touch on later. The federal budget is important because it reflects and determines fiscal policy. In just 6 months, we have acquired a $1.1 trillion federal deficit. Last year's 12-month deficit was $1.7 trillion. The last time the United States was in a budget surplus was in 2001. As seen in this graph, in 2022, individual income tax was over half of the federal revenue at 53.8%. Further data shows that 80% of income tax was paid by 10% of filers, while those who made less than $50,000 a year had negative tax payments but paid Medicare and Social Security. In this presentation, the focus will be on taxation. The second highest contribution to government revenue was social insurance taxes, which funds the Social Security program. In any given year, for instance 2022, they collect trillions in taxes, which are majority income taxes, where people who work and pay taxes as part of their salary contribute to the revenue. But for Social Security taxes, everyone regardless of their income pays. These make up 83% of the federal revenue. Federal revenue is meant to be invested back into the country and promote the well-being of Americans. In 2022, the federal government contributed most to Social Security and Medicare. Fiscal policy is very political, and with Republicans and Democrats against each other on what issues matter and why, the topic of where we spend our money has a lot of contributing factors. In any year, when the United States incurs a federal deficit, they issue bonds to citizens or other countries to pay it off because they need to use borrowed money to make up for this deficit. The interest rate on these bonds is called the net interest. As seen here, the net interest in 2022 was $475 billion. The interest payments on the debt were 2.4% of the GDP, but are projected to increase to 3.9% of the GDP over the next 10 years. The net interest payments are right now under 7% of the federal budget, but are projected to rise to 15%. These interest payments are necessary due to the debt we are in, but have a huge opportunity cost. Since we are spending money on interest, funding is not going to defense, education, research, etc. What is fiscal policy? Fiscal policy is discretionary changes in government spending and/or taxation with the goal of shifting aggregate demand. As we have discussed, aggregate demand is a schedule or curve that shows a nation's real GDP that all buyers want to purchase at each price level. It is often initiated by the president. Fiscal policy, is often initiated by the president or the Council of Economic Advisors where the economy is unhealthy. For example, during a recession, they meet and decide what fiscal policy to enact. They strive to achieve strong economic growth with ideal inflation and employment rates and decrease poverty. Ideal GDP is 2.7%, ideal unemployment is 4%, and inflation for 2%. In this presentation, the focus will be on taxation, as I previously mentioned. According to the expenditure approach, which is that GDP is equal to the sum of consumption by household, gross business investments, government spending, net exports, the government can directly affect taxes, which will directly affect consumption and government spending. Aggregate demand is the total demand for goods and services in a particular time frame, and aggregate supply is the total supply in the same amount of time. This graph shows macroeconomic equilibrium, where aggregate supply and aggregate demand intersect, and as I mentioned earlier, GDP is 2.7%, unemployment is 4%, and inflation is 2%. Fiscal policy affects and changes taxes and government spending, which increase and decrease aggregate demand. Expansionary fiscal policy cuts taxes and or raises government spending to stimulate the economy. This is typically done during a recession to increase GDP, decrease unemployment, and increase inflation. Contractionary fiscal policy, which is merely theoretical and not often enacted, decreases government spending and increases taxes, which decreases the GDP, increases unemployment, and decreases inflation during a period of hyperinflation. The Wall Street Journal claimed that many Americans find the taxation system to be too complex and they would prefer a flat tax rate. If the government were to enact a flat tax rate, it would face complications because of family life, who is a dependent, and the complexity of modern finances and social life impeding their complexities into the tax rate. There's no simple answer for the desire for simpler taxes, and the reason why taxes are so complex is because of both policy interaction over time and because of human nature. A flat tax definition would be every household, regardless of income, paying the same amount, the same rate of taxes for income taxes. For example, if they were to pay 10% as the flat tax rate, an individual making 10K a year would pay 1K. An individual making $100,000 a year would pay $10,000 in taxes. And continuing on, if someone were to make $1 million a year, they would pay $100,000 in taxes. It's allegedly simpler, but there's a lot of implications. Where are we today? It would take nearly 2 hours for me to sit here and explain why we ended up with our tax system, its combination of designs, and the no clear organization. It is always being molded in different directions, so parties have different ideas for what to do. Due to this, any changes to the tax system has collateral effects. Donald Trump's 2017 tax changes will expire at the end of 2025, so Republicans and Democrats are coming up with opposing ideas on what to enact. The Tax Policy Center, which is the liberal-leaning foundation, wants to raise the standard deduction for families and create the value-added tax, which is similar to retail sales tax but collects revenue at different stages of production instead of just at the retail level. They also want to raise the personal credit to $3,900 and $15,600 for a family of four. The Tax Foundation, which is the conservative-leaning foundation, would raise taxes on corporate, individual, and capital income. They would expand tax credits for workers and families, expand tax bases to include more types of income, and triple tariffs on imports of steel and aluminum from China. Both plans would eliminate itemized deductions, which include tax breaks for mortgage interest, donations, state, local, and more. Just for some background on the tax breaks, currently the targeted tax breaks in Pennsylvania are for 65-year-old homeowners and renters, 50-year-old and up widowers and widows, and disabled people who are 18 years of age and make less than $45,000 a year. Simpler taxes is a give and take. The positives would be happier people, reduced tax evasion because of the complexity being taken away, and raised tax subsidies. Negatively, it would target subsidies. The targeted subsidies would lead to more complexity, and it would reduce the ability to achieve other goals of the government. Partisanship is rampant in the government, and it can affect economic decisions. For example, oftentimes people want to broaden the income tax base by getting rid of targeted tax breaks and lowering rates, but opposers won't allow it to become a bill or a law. It would overall be healthy for the economy if they lowered income support for pensioners and decreased state-provided medical insurance, but if a politician were to ever suggest this, their career may never recover. This is relating to the political considerations criticism of fiscal policy, because it's prohibiting action from taking place because of the politics involved. Is fiscal health being overlooked? I will now share background information on our federal budget. Let's take a look at recent data. Our last budget surplus was over 20 years ago, before 2001. You can see that fiscal policy addresses recessions after financial crisis and the pandemic, which were helped by fiscal policy by the government. Before the crisis of 2008, the deficit was less than 5% and considered manageable. But in 2008, the deficit was 10% of the GDP, and in 2020, it was 15%. The cost is driving up national debt and getting worse. In 2000, as you can see, it was 25% of the GDP, and now it's nearly 100%. Fiscal stimulus was delivered after both the Great Recession and the pandemic in attempts to stabilize the economy. You can see the resulting decrease in public debt, especially from 2020 to 2022. After the 2008 recession, you can see that the deficit shrank from 10% to less than 5% after expansionary fiscal policy was employed. The differing approaches between Biden and Trump. Due to the COVID stimulus, in 2016, the net federal debt was 75% of our GDP. In 2021, the debt was 97% of the GDP. The Congressional Budget Office predicts that in 3 decades, the debt will be 181% of our GDP, meaning the government's annual interest payments will be larger than the money we spend on military, education, highways, research, and this could be a financial crisis. President Biden and Donald Trump have differing approaches on what fiscal policy to put into place. President Biden wants to raise taxes on companies and wealthy people, but Trump's tax cut package in 2017 cut taxes on companies. Therefore, companies prefer him. Despite the debt, Biden expanded. Sorry. Despite the debt, the stimulus in 2021, which led to sparked inflation. Trump said deregulation and tax cuts will lead to growth, which in reality, it did not lead too much to growth, but it did boost the revenue and also set some of the costs of tax cuts. President Biden increased the taxes to lower the GDP to debt ratio, but it also shrunk the economy by 1.3%. If Donald Trump's 2017 tax cuts stay in place, they would increase the debt but expand long run GDP by 1.2%. As I previously stated, in just 6 months, we have acquired a $1.1 trillion federal deficit. Last year's 12-month deficit was $1.7 trillion. The interest on public debt is now higher than the amount we spend on the military. We would rather spend money on other things, but the opportunity cost of paying the debt is very large. The COVID stimulus has run out, and we are spending money on Medicare and Social Security. Whichever approach is taken, there will be gains and losses. Both political parties remain silent on many issues to keep their popularity for the votes. The current financial debt needs to be faced before it turns into a financial crisis or recession. If investors in the government lose confidence in our fiscal health, then large tax increases and budget cuts may be the only way to pay for the deficit. The opportunity cost of paying the debt prohibits us from paying for other things, as I previously mentioned. Finally, Social Security and Medicare. What are Medicare and Social Security? Medicare is a government-established program that provides health care to seniors and younger people with disabilities. 67 million people use it. It has an estimated cost of $900 billion in 2024, and the hospital insurance fund is estimated to be emptied by 2031. Social Security is also government provided, which gives money to seniors and people to disabilities, has 68 million people. It cost the government $1.5 trillion in 2024, and the trust fund for it is expected to be empty by 2033. Both programs are funded through payroll taxes and spent more money than they earned. Doing nothing will lead to complete depletion. Now I will go over the different plans. Biden plans to stabilize Medicare funds by increasing income taxes, investment gain taxes, and self-employment income tax for people with an annual salary of over $400K to stabilize Social Security. He plans to tax the same high-income households to expand the benefits. His budget proposal is unlikely to win approval, but it would raise Medicare taxes on wages and self-employment income from 3.8% to 5% for people who make more than $400K a year. It would also increase the 3.8% tax on net investment income and direct the revenue from the tax to Medicare's Hospital Insurance Fund. Medicare's Hospital Insurance Fund is Part A of the program that covers inpatient care, while Part B is medical insurance. He would also change the law so that the same earners pay Medicare taxes on their income from active businesses. Furthermore, Biden would direct savings from his proposal to lower the cost of prescription drugs for Medicare recipients. An actuary estimated that his plan would fund Medicare for 75 years. In relation to Social Security, he proposed increasing payroll taxes for people currently making more than $400,000 a year to close the gap. Currently, Social Security taxes 6.2% each on employees and employers who have not yet made $168,000 yet. One bill supported by most of the House Representatives, Democrats, plans to raise Social Security taxes on high-income households and expand benefits, but the Democrats never voted on it. Senator Rick Scott initially proposed sunsetting all federal legislation in 5 years, but after political debate, exempt Medicare, Social Security, and veterans programs from this plan. Trump wanted to make changes to strengthen the deficit, to, get out of the deficit. The Republican Study Committee represents conservatives in the House of Representatives, and they wanted to increase the qualifying ages for Social Security and Medicare to save money. This has become a political issue, with partisanship drawing a line between the two sides. At the State of the Union speech, the president claimed that Republicans could cut Medicare and Social Security, to which Republican lawmakers responded saying he's a liar. As I previously mentioned, Senator Rick Scott, a Republican from Florida, proposed in 2022 that they would sunset all federal legislation in 5 years, but amid pushback, he clarified that he would exempt Social Security, Medicare, and veterans programs, as I previously stated. Inaction from both parties would lead to automatic benefit cuts. Sunset legislation is getting rid of legislation that has not done its job. The political state of this problem has led to both politicians promising to do less than needed. Higher income taxes provide higher revenue for the government and can close the debt gap, reduce the amount of money for businesses to invent and grow, income redistribution, and help low-income households. It could discourage entrepreneurs. Some Democratic voters could vote for politicians who plan to equalize income and trust and fund the government. Raising ages negatively affect those who rely on Social Security and Medicare. It's against democratic values, and people would have to retire later and plan for getting less money than these benefits. In conclusion, the tax system is complex and has decades of policy combined that created the current system. Any changes to it need to be intentional, efficient, and happen fast. The president elected this year will need to act fast to protect Social Security and Medicare, and they will need to put care into our nation's fiscal health and deficit. Thank you.